And it's 13.6. This is Chopin E minor. Let's listen from top to bottom. All right, so with this exercise, there are about a million different ways that we could approach the harmonic analysis to this. This is considered to be one of the most challenging harmonic analysis exercises in the Romantic literature. So that should be fun. And I'm going to go through and look at just different options because I'm figuring that you guys probably spelled the bejesus out of these chords and chordsmithed your way through the exercise. And then I'm going to offer another couple of different ways to look at it. What we are going to need here little circle of thirds never hurts. All right, so Chopin sets us off with a tonic chord in first inversion. Okay, I'm going to use some pop chords here. In other words, E minor over G. All right, or in E minor, you call that 1/6. So our first chord's pretty easy. And then we have this neighbor tone, which is going to come into play. This neighbor tone figure, that's going to become a motive. In measure number 2, I have a chord that I'm tempted to start to chalk up. F sharp, A, B, and E. F sharp, A, B, E. F, A, B, and E. Well, that doesn't really make sense as a chord. What I'm understanding here is that the chord actually happens on beat 3, and this is just one approach to this, okay, the chord actually happens on beat 3, because if we include B, which is the note that's sounding in the soprano, with those other notes, I get a B7 over F sharp. And that makes sense as a dominant 7th chord. Okay? B7 is the dominant of our home key. So we could understand this chord here as 5/7. So Chopin holds a note in suspension and then resolves it down by step. So what I'm going to do is put my Roman numeral here. I'm going to say that that's 5/4/3. Okay, but not all of the notes have arrived yet. The D sharp has not arrived yet. And so because the D sharp forms a 7th with the bass, I'm going to show that as a 7/6 suspension. 7/6 suspension. In the very next measure, it's possible to come up with quite a few chords. And I'm sure that you all came up with a French augmented 6 chord. French augmented 6 chord on the downbeat. Okay, that sounds like this. But remember that the French augmented 6 chord can also be understood as like a 5/7 5 flat chord. Okay, so it could be one of two things. And then if we look at the second half of the measure, keep in mind we're in cut time, so I'm going to say the second beat, okay, which looks like beat 3. If I include the B, I wind up with a possible B, half diminished, 7 chord over F. So that's another option. And then if I go a step further and look at the second half of that beat, I have a chord that can be spelled G sharp, B, D, and F. So that would be G sharp, okay, G sharp, full diminished 7 over F. So it's possible to have 3 different chords in that very same measure. Now, what Benward describes in the chapter is a situation where you may have non-functional harmony and just simply chromatic passing movement. And that is something that we may come to accept for this measure, because maybe there really isn't an answer. I'm going to provide an alternative answer a little bit later. But as we go on to measure number 4, we can see clearly in measure number 4 that there is an E7 chord, and that is a dominant 7th chord if we choose to accept that. Okay, a dominant 7th chord, an E7 chord. E7 is dominant 7 of, you guessed it, A minor, which is 4. Okay, and yeah, we're going to see 4 make its appearance over here. We're going to see 4, an A minor 7 chord, make an appearance. Okay, we'll deal with this measure here in a second. Let's take a look at measure number 4. In the second half of the measure, we can clearly figure a B flat or a C sharp full diminished 7 chord over E. C sharp full diminished 7 over E. And we're tempted to, on the strong beat of the second half of the measure, we could come up with an E minor 7 chord. Okay? Another way to understand that would be a 7/6 suspension. Okay, so that C sharp full diminished 7 chord is not arriving until the second half of that beat, and we have this 7/6 suspension. Okay, so we saw a 7/6 suspension earlier, and so perhaps Chopin is using this 7/6 suspension as a motive. Okay, so if this was a 7/6 suspension, and we believe that this chord is in fact a C sharp full diminished 7 chord, then it must be a leading tone chord if we believe our secondary relationships. That means that C sharp must be a leading tone. And if C sharp is a leading tone, C sharp would be a leading tone to a dominant, or excuse me, to a 4 chord. Okay, in the key of A minor, which would be D minor. Okay, C sharp is the leading tone of D minor, or even D major. But C sharp could also be a common tone diminished 7th chord as well. So that's a possibility. All right. The other possibility is linear non-functional harmony.